So it's nice to be here. My name's Craig Peck, and I'm on the educational leadership side.
Oh, that's right. We were supposed to introduce ourselves.
No, that's okay. I'll take care of it. I'm fine.
Okay, all right.
And I'll
Okay.
use the big microphone.
Okay.
Can I pull it over? It's like a 1950s
Yeah.
news station, so it's good. But I'm on the ed leadership side of things. I just put together, I thought, 3 just overview thoughts. One is thinking about publishing as a game versus publishing as an academic statement. And I've been pursuing tenure for about 7 years. So during that time, you need to, it's been made clear that you need to publish in terms of earning your next rank and earning tenure. So that makes it feel a lot like a game. You also hear about numbers. People count up how many publications you have, that type of thing. So you have that sort of, and then you also start to hear about how people get published in, collaborative efforts and books. Sometimes some journals where if someone knows someone, at least it gets to the editorial level. So it feels kind of like a game. But the other side of it is publishing as an academic statement or act. And it's important to keep in mind that, even if it can feel like a game, and sometimes you're doing things that, in terms of publication, where you're concerned about your quote-unquote numbers, because if you're employed, that's what you need to do. You also have to be true to yourself as, I want to try when I'm publishing to say something that I think is worthy of people reading. You can't give wholly into a sort of, a cynical approach of, I just need to get this in because that'll count as number 14, and then I can do this. You have to really think about it as, that's important because I'd like to stay employed. It's also important for me to get my message heard and think about the venues where you're going to share it and think about those things. So I think those are kind of a tension that I've felt, over the last few years, and really trying to navigate that has been something that I've tried to do. And there are works, I won't go through them all, but nor will I admit to you which ones they are. There are works that I'm more proud of than others, and I think that would be true for any creative enterprise. If you talk to someone who's a musician, they'll say, this is my favorite song that I've created, and then they'll say, I don't like this one, and it turns out the one they don't like was the most popular. Isn't that ironic, right? I can't say that any of my academic works are that popular. If you read them, please let me know. You'll be the first to know. Anyway, there are ones that I'm really, really proud of because they took a long time and they took a lot of effort and thought. And that's, to me, the essence of the academic mission is trying to work through those things. The other 2 things I'll keep a lot less detail. Second thing is you'll hear about the revise and resubmit. You'll hear people say a lot of times, I got to revise and resubmit. And that's a good thing. I've asked some folks who've been editors of major journals how many people actually do, when invited to revise and resubmit, actually revise and resubmit, and it's been surprisingly low, like 20 to 30% actually even try again. And the thing I would encourage you to do, if you get a revise and resubmit, that's a really good step for 2 things. One, it says that they're really interested. They are actually interested in you revising and resubmitting. So you have to do it, but it's going to be more work. The second thing is, if you honestly engage what the reviewers are saying, if you try and treat their arguments, just like when you're writing your dissertation, you've got an advisor who's telling you to do things and a committee who's telling you to do things. It's the same thing here. If you engage with their arguments, you're going to improve the manuscript because you're actually having a conversation now. You're having some pushback on some ideas that may have been just placed down and are almost inert, and now they've got some life because somebody's saying, you know what, this didn't work. This didn't work at all. You're going to have to basically essentially prove to them, you know what, it has worked and here's why. The second one, and I'll just keep this one quite brief, is co-authoring works best as a long-term collaboration. So the way I look at co-authoring is, you try it once, and if it works well, you keep doing it. And if it doesn't, it's no tears, and however it goes, you probably won't go back. And by that I mean, if one person gives more than the other and it doesn't feel like a mutual relationship, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, that was a good try that time, but let's try and move on to somebody else. So if you did look at my CV, you'll see, I've co-authored a lot with Rick. We work really well together. We think similarly but differently enough that we push one another, and we also know that if we say, I'm going to have this to you by Thursday at 8 p.m., you'll have it. And those are essentials. That's what I look for. And I also have worked with this guy next to me, and that's gone really well, actually. He is was a really great graduate student in terms of collaboration, in terms of I asked him to write a specific part of a manuscript. He got it done really quickly, professionally, and was a good addition to a piece that we worked with. Ty Douglas was another guy on that. So those are all things to think about. So I hope I haven't taken up too much time, but those are just things I think about. I wish you all luck. It's a great endeavor. You're going to hear a lot of different things, but in the end, you have to go back it's fun to go back and read something that's been published, and you say, gosh, I created that, and oh, you know what? That's a pretty good idea. Oh, and I forgot I wrote that. I forgot I wrote this whole thing. So that's, Kathy,
Kathy, you want to go next?
Yes. So, yeah.
Hey, I'm Kathy Hytten, and I am also on the ed leadership side of things, although in my previous life I was in foundations also for a number of years before I got here. And I actually have taught a lot of graduate seminars kind of like this. I teach an introduction to doctoral studies class at a previous institution where we spend a whole day talking about publication, so it's hard for me to reduce it to like 2 minutes. And I also come as a teacher, so I have handouts for you. Very easy one, how to publish in scholarly journals from AERA, from Ed Researcher, and then a short summation of some key points. But what I'll say is you know, I'm afraid we're all going to reproduce each other or be repetitive. But I think that there's my biggest concern about doctoral work is that many of you haven't been prepared to become independent scholars. Your entire foundation prior to becoming a doctoral student, you've been a dependent scholar. Someone's told you what to do and you've done it. You've been a good student but not a good learner. You follow the rules, you ask, like, just figure out what a teacher wants and give it to them. But doctoral research is completely different. You have to become an independent scholar. You have to be able to calculate things. And the way you learn how to do something is through imitation. It's simple. There's a kind of, whenever anybody says to me, I want you to help me publish something, or I don't know how to publish, I feel like that's an example of a learned helplessness. There's no mystery involved, right? You have read millions of published articles. Do what they do. It's simple, right? I mean, I'm making it more simple than it is. But seriously, like the starting point for a productive scholarly research career is imitation. You read an article, where do you want to publish? Well, you got to find your people. You're going to find your people in a certain journal. For me, like, it's philosophers of ed, educational theory, and I want to be playing with them in their game. So I look at what are they doing. So I read the articles in the journal that I want to publish in. And I'm not reading for content unless it's related to my research. I'm reading for how do they formulate claims? How do they make an argument? How long is the article? How many sections are there? How do they use the work of other scholars? How do they hook the reader? How do they use, what evidence do they use to support their arguments? How do they draw on theory? How do they make the case for the significance and the relevance of their work? Like, these are not mysterious ideas. Everything we read that's published has these central features in them. And all you need to do is look at how other people do it and then emulate them, only you're doing it with your ideas. But the kind of pieces are all clear there. I think that the biggest challenge that I face when I'm mentoring young scholars, whether it's new faculty members or new students, is there's a fear surrounded by publishing, and that's the biggest barrier. And it's not just doctoral students, it's new faculty. And so I've been asked, time to work with new faculty members, second, third year faculty members. And so we'll sit down and I said, okay, show me all your rejection letters. And they'll be like, I don't have any. And I was like, okay, that's your problem, right? Your problem is not how to do something, it's that you haven't submitted anything, right? And why haven't you submitted anything, right? Because there's some kind of fear. It's not ready. Well, if that's your idea, it's never going to be ready, right? And like, there are some strategies, right? Figure out, you have to, like, there's simple things with writing. It's got to be clear. It's got to be organized. You have to make an argument. That's the most important thing that I think that people don't understand about published articles. You should be able to say in one sentence what the point of the article is. What is the argument you're making in this article and how you're making it? And I could go on about that, but I have a handout, so you can look at the handout. And the handout just says how to plan your manuscript, write your manuscript, and submit your manuscript. And you'll read it all over probably and go, duh, like, this is not that complicated. But what's the barrier for a lot of us is the psychological barrier, the fear of rejection, right? Every one of us has been rejected. Every one of us has been, who's tried, right? Like, you can't get rejected unless you try. And you should assume, actually, the most things you submit are going to get rejected, and you're going to get feedback and be able to work on them. And if you get hit the first time, that's great. It's exciting. But rejection is part of the game we play. And so I think that among the biggest issues is, figure out where you want to submit and do what they tell you to do. Everything has submission guidelines, do them. Don't submit a 40-page manuscript to a journal that accepts 20-page manuscripts. People are just going to be pissed. They're going to just feel like you didn't look at the guidelines, right? Don't submit an empirical article to a theoretical journal. Don't submit, a quantitative article to the International Journal of Qualitative Studies. It's just dumb, right? So like make
And you will get
strategic,
rejected.
just strategic decisions.
But then they'll have a rejection letter.
Yes. No,
She told me
seriously.
to get one.
when I ask a lot of people about this, productive scholars have lots of rejection letters. There's a guy who served on my doctoral committee, Jim Garrison. Some of you might know him. He's at Virginia Tech. He did a lot of work with John Dewey. He's got hundreds of articles published. I'll never forget, after I did my dissertation defense, we're sitting around drinking a beer, and he said to me, you know how many manuscripts I got rejected before I got the first one accepted? I was like, no, I have no idea. And he said, at least 25. I have this stack of letters. And this guy's got tons of books, and almost everything he writes gets hits now. And I'm like, I don't know anybody who has that many letters and still is doing this, right? I work heavily in philosophy of education and publish a lot in Ed Theory, which is the major journal in the field. And I tell people always, I was the executive director of the organization, I was on the exec board, and everybody there knows me. People would be shocked to know that my first five submissions in a row to the conference, which is a published paper, were rejected. 5 in a row. Most people would have given up by then. I'm stubborn, right? But I learned from the rejections to try and figure out, all right, how do I craft an article to fit this kind of journal, a 15-page article? How do I make an argument, and how do I make it provocative in the ways that they want to do it? So, part of it is our own barriers. So I'll pass these around. If there's not enough, I didn't know how many people would show up. I can get more. You can shoot me an email.
Good.
Yep.
David?
I'm David Ayers, and I guess I'm actually going to be sort of a foot in both sides of the department. Currently, I'm in the educational foundation side, but I'm working on some opportunities in the area of community college policy, which will be in the EDD program. So I guess I claim both sides. I actually have really one point of departure related to publication, and then I'll sort of elaborate on that a little bit. But I think the big thing I want to say is ask questions that have no known answers. If you know the answer to your question, then what's the purpose? You need to ask questions you don't know the answer to. And that, in order to ask a good question, you have to be familiar with the literature in that area. So otherwise, how do you know what kinds of questions to ask? How do you don't know maybe there have been 15 studies that have already answered this question? So the first thing is to identify a compelling problem and ask a related problem, ask a related question that has not been answered. I think too often we start off our research knowing what we want to find, and it's a whole lot more exciting if you don't know what you're going to find. And that in order to come up with answers which you may or may not anticipate, you have to have a solid research design. You have to have good data analysis, good data collection analysis, and be open to that counter evidence. Be open to evidence that it's nothing more exciting than looking for one thing and finding something completely different. That's why they call it research and not journalism. The other thing related to that research question, everything depends, if it's an empirical type work, everything really depends on that question. So it flows from there. Your question is grounded in a problem. You need to have some sort of theoretical framework for developing and shaping that question. Your research design, your methods, everything. There should be a very coherent string moving from your research question through your theoretical framework, through your methods, to your analysis, and your findings. There should be a very coherent theme or string or thread running through that entire manuscript. And that, I think, is one of the things that when I review manuscripts that I find missing, and it's hard. You have to have that. If there's not this goes back to that matter of having an argument. And that argument needs it almost seems repetitive when you're writing a manuscript, because the very beginning of each section you're almost saying the same thing, but you're saying it in different ways. But that sort of pulls all of your different parts, all the different parts of your manuscript together, and gives it that coherence that you have to have in order to have a sustained argument across the manuscript. I guess the final thing I would say is related to asking good questions is write about something that you're passionate about, because it's going to be a grueling process, and after you've gotten a few rejections, you're going to be tempted to just give up. But if you're passionate about whatever your topic is, and you really believe that is contributing something to the field or to policy or practice or theory, then there's that intrinsic motivation to keep going. And so I suggest to write, like I said, write about something that you're passionate about.
Okay, thank you. My name is Rick Reitzug. I'm a professor in ed leadership here. I've been here at UNCG for about 15 years. A good portion of that time, including right now, I'm serving also as department chair. And I want to just comment on a few things that others have said and add a few more points. And also, most of what I say will be coming probably less from my experience as a researcher and publishing, and more from about 6 years that I spent as the editor of a journal. And during those 6 years, as the editor, I had to read every manuscript that was submitted to that journal. And so I read about 100 manuscripts a year during those 6 years. And you begin to see a lot of the same kind of simple things over and over and over again that annoy you. And so I would say the first rule of publishing is don't annoy the editor or the reviewers, okay? Do the stuff that we all can do that well, okay? So, for example, keep it clean. In other words, keep your manuscript as error-free as possible. You would be amazed at how many things get submitted for publication that are riddled with typos, spelling errors, formatting errors, etc., etc. And the problem is that as either an editor or a reviewer, most editors and reviewers are busy people, and so you start reading this and you find you're having to waste extra time trying to wade your way through the mistakes, and you get annoyed. And if you annoy the editor or the reviewers, you've decreased your chances of getting something accepted for publication right away. Another thing that Kathy mentioned, I just want to emphasize, is comply with the journal's publication submission guidelines. Don't just assume I can just send this out in any format. Each journal has specific publication instructions for those who submit articles to be considered for publication. Make sure you follow them. If they say they want APA format, don't send them a Chicago format. If they say we want 1,000 to 2,000 word articles, don't send them 8,000 word article. Another thing is figure out what the editorial focus is of a journal. What's the audience and what's the focus? Is the audience in ed leadership, for example, is it people who work in K through 12 public schools, or is it university professors? You're going to write the article very differently depending on which of those you're trying to appeal to. And a journal will be intended primarily for one of those audiences. The other thing I want to do is just talk a little bit, just kind of back up a little bit, and talk about how this process works. Most of you may know this, but maybe all of you don't know this. The way this process typically works when you're trying to publish in scholarly journals is you submit the article through whatever means the journal says, in whatever format the journal says. The editor or the editorial staff then sends it out to a number of reviewers, typically at least 3, sometimes 4 or 5. The reviewers are mostly other university professors around the country, if the editor is savvy and has a good list of either good editorial review board or good reviewers that they can access, they will try to send it usually to someone who has some expertise in whatever the topical areas of your manuscript are, and also that does the type of methodological research that your manuscript is written in. And so if it's qualitative study, they'll try to send it to someone who they know does a lot of qualitative work, and vice versa for a quantitative study or a more philosophical or theoretical type piece. And so then the reviewers have typically a month to review the manuscript. They send the reviews back to the editor. Different journals will work it differently, but in the journal that I was the editor of, I was the only editor. We didn't have an editorial staff. And so I would read the reviews. I'd read the manuscript first, then I'd read the reviews from the reviewers, and then I'd make a decision and on whether the manuscript should be published or not. Now, that's not it's not a publish or rejection only issue. There's a number of judgments or verdicts that you can receive. And typically those are accept as is. That rarely ever happens. I mean, it's just like your dissertation defense. You usually don't get away without any changes after the defense, okay? So usually there are some changes. Sometimes it will be, the second tier down is accept with revisions, which means if you can make that it means they really think this is a great piece and they want to publish it, but there's some things that can be done to improve it, and as long as you do those things, they'll accept it. The third is what Craig had mentioned, revise and resubmit. Okay, and as Craig pointed out, if you could revise and resubmit, they're interested in their piece, and if you can do what they tell you to do, they will publish it. Okay, because otherwise they would just reject it. And so you should always resubmit something that's a revise and resubmit, and you should always go out and celebrate when you get a revise and resubmit, because it means you're in the ballpark. It means you got a shot. And then the one that none of us like but all of us have received is reject. It just means they're just not interested. It's either it's a quality issue. Sometimes they don't think it fits the journal focus. Sometimes they know who wrote it and maybe they just don't like you or something. No, I've wondered about that sometimes, but that shouldn't be it. But the other thing I wanted to say was just about rejection. Okay, I've gotten many rejections. Kathy's confessed she's gotten many rejections. I don't know about David and Craig, but we all get rejections. And what's the response when you get a rejection? The response is that damn editor, those damn reviewers, they know what they're talking about. That's the first reaction. This is really a good piece. And then you kind of let it sit, and about a week or two later you realize they really do know what they're talking about 90% of the time. And we don't like to be rejected. It hurts. And so our first response is kind of to lash back out. So don't let it deflate your ego if you get rejected. Don't let it cause you to change careers if you're wanting to be a university professor and you get rejected in the first 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 manuscripts you submit. Because the only way you get better is by trying again. So that's all I'll say for now. I have some more points, but I want to open up the discussion a little bit. So questions or comments? If there's no comments, Craig's got to give you the next 3 points.
See this guy. Well, maybe I'll take that collaboration. That kind of hurts me, man. Come on, how did I become the fan? And if you want me to photocopy this and hand it out.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot, Kathy. I did not come prepared.
I have a question.
Sure.
I want to ask about before submitting, while you're writing, every good writer needs a good editor. So what would you suggest about how can I find a good editor? I mean, it would be great if it would be another PhD student, but we're all so busy. So what would be like maybe the best second thing?
Go ahead.
I always have at least one person read everything that I wrote. Usually it's a friend, and when I was a PhD student, it was another PhD student, and it had to be somebody I trusted, right? And like Craig said about, when you co-write with somebody, you learn the experience. If you give somebody something for feedback and they give you, this is really good, they have not helped you at all, right? And that's a lot of what happened when I was a doctoral student. The comments I got on my writing were frequent, this is great. And it didn't help me develop my writing. And then when I got into the early part of my career, I would submit things that get rejected. And I was like, nobody ever told me I didn't know how to write, right? So it hurt my feelings in different ways. Not that I didn't know how to write, but I think, you have to think about reciprocity, right? So if you're going to be asking for somebody to give you careful feedback, then you're going to do the same for them, right? And everybody has the time for that who's a doctoral student because they want the same thing when they're a doctoral student. But it becomes hard when you're like, I was complaining to Rick right before this. I've been reading papers, doctoral proposals for the last 3 days, and some of them are so poorly written that it's just, it makes me angry, right? And I just don't have the time to fix major writing errors. There is a writing center on campus, right? That's what they're there for. If you have major structural errors, you're shaking your head no. They're not helpful.
No.
We're international.
Mm-hmm. And they don't work with you?
They do work, but they don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Again, another obstacle and additional obstacle.
This is a thing that even approached the writing center. Like at Winston-Salem State University, they do have a master's degree in ESL or English that they read for master's level students. Here they don't do that. I ask them constantly, at least if you have master or doctorate students that could read because they could know APA style, Chicago style. They say, well, it's not going to happen and this is how it's supposed to be.
Well, style questions are,
I've been there since 2009.
certain things like
Didn't
style
change.
questions for me are learned helplessness. I don't care at all about style. I hate APA style, but if you can't figure out the basics of where the period goes, how the citation goes, you're not trying,
No, it's not
right?
right.
So style
know
is
what I
the
mean.
issue. But I do know what you mean about international students and writing when English is not the first language. Because honestly speaking, those are the hardest students to give feedback to because it's not all of them, but a lot of them, the problem is the English language, not the construction of the ideas, and what you're looking for is not feedback on your writing in terms of ideas and construction of an argument, which is what faculty are prepared to do. It's editing. And that's something that most faculty don't have the time to do. In my experience, I've had students, international students especially, pay editors because it's so time consuming.
That's what we do.
And I'm not sure that's the best solution, but I don't know the alternative solution if you don't have a friend or colleague who has the time and energy to do the work that it takes to give the feedback.
It is, I think it is tough sometimes to find someone to read your work because everyone's busy. There are very few people in our society who aren't busy. And so one way of doing that is just making a pact. You read my stuff, I'll read your stuff. And, other times it's if you're doing work, if you're writing in an area if you're writing in an area, you should know some of the other people who are writing in that area because you've reviewed some of the literature. Well, sometimes just send it to somebody at another, that's writing in that area, even though you don't know them. I did that early in my career to someone that was kind of very well known and thinking okay, I'm, basing what I'm doing here partially on this person's work, never thinking I'd get a response, but he called me on the phone and talked to me for 45 minutes on the phone and gave me feedback, and so, and I've never forgotten it, and I've always respected him because of that. So, sometimes that's another strategy. But more, I think trading off with someone else is often a good strategy. The other thing I'd say is don't necessarily believe everything that someone that's reviewed your work tells you, okay, because they're not perfect either. You still own that piece of work, but listen and think about it, but ultimately don't necessarily say that you have to do everything that person says. It may or may not always be good advice. So
Something just to piggyback, something I'm still learning through my dissertation writing is to get used to being rejected, because as a new scholar, it is painful. I mean, I bet you experienced that. Even as a human being, it's painful, right? But something I learned is that we have to get used to that. We have to get used to that, because at the moment when I read my revisions, I got furious and I hated myself, and when I finish this, I will never see the light. But then I just put it aside. And the next day, early in the morning, I was a new person, and I said, let me look at this. Oh, maybe she's right. Maybe I didn't notice this before. Wow. And then, in my case, I like those challenges because that's something that I didn't see before, but it makes me more aware of what I'm writing. So, and it's so amazing because you start hearing those people when you keep writing. It's like you hear their voices, because their voices just, I mean, I don't know what it is, but when you're writing, you like, okay, what is this statement? What do you mean by this? Remember, not everybody understands what you're writing. What is your question? What is your challenging question here? What are you trying to find out? So it becomes part of you as a writer. And I never learned that as a doctoral student. I learned that through my dissertation writing. And something else I did, talking about editors, I asked a good friend of mine who happens to be an ESL teacher to read my articles. I mean, she's an editor of a newsletter for her church. She's an excellent writer, but she doesn't know about my theoretical framework. But she also challenged me with some questions. So it was amazing to see somebody who is a good writer but doesn't know about your field challenge you with some questions. And a colleague of mine who's also writing her dissertation asking me questions more in depth about my writing. So first I sent it to my good friend, and then I sent it to a colleague who is also writing her dissertation. Two different opinions. And like you said, don't believe everything they say, but just be aware of what they're saying too, because that's a good exercise. Anyway, that's just my
Question. I believe there are a lot of one-hit wonders out there. I think that sometimes people who are authors should write one book and stop. So I tend to just say that most of what I've written is not it. So I'm guilty of not having any rejections because I haven't submitted anything. But for folks before they graduate from PhD programs, what are some thoughts about how to tell when you've written something that you should pursue to that level? Because I mean, it's a lot of work, so you can't. Yeah, there have to be some guidelines. There are some thoughts about when to say this is something I should go a little further and submit.
I would just ask the faculty member who you're working with. I mean, if it's something you've written for a class paper, or if it's a part of your dissertation, ask the faculty member, do you think this has publication possibilities? Where do you think, and if the answer is yes, you should really go for this, then I think the next thing would be, well, what journal might it be a good fit for? Which is another thing I wanted to say is make sure you do find, actually I think I did say it, yeah, but make sure you find the right journal too, as far as the selectiveness of the journal. Dr. Craig was saying that not everything we write is our favorite piece, and we know that sometimes we write something, we think it's publishable, but it's not really that great, and so after a while, once you know the journals in the field, if you've done something that you think is really top-notch, send it to the best journal in the field. If you think like, okay, this might have a shot somewhere, but it's not really that great, but I think it's at least worth trying to get a publication out of it, then send it to one of the lower tier journals in your field or in that area, because they do have somewhat different standards. Some are much more selective. Some accept 3 to 5% of the submissions that get sent there, and others will accept close to 50%. So
I'll tag on that. And I guess the criteria for me wouldn't be that it's not that great. It's just I'm done thinking about it, I guess.
Mhm.
And it's maybe a smaller idea. I'm thinking one specifically, and could have done more research, could have broken out and gotten a lot deeper into it, but I don't think I wasn't interested in pursuing that any further. So I think that's kind of, it's a stopping point for you intellectually too, or it's a midpoint for you intellectually, and you want to play with an idea, and this is kind of for you to put a marker down where you are intellectually at that moment thinking about an idea. I think getting advice from faculty members is a good one, but I think it's also kind of internally, I've thought what I can about this, and this seems like it could provoke people to think a little bit more. That's pretty much a time to send it out. And I think this distinction between, there are different levels of journals, and there's a reason that different levels of journals exist, just as there are different, some people play in the Greensboro Coliseum, some people play in a small little venue with 20 people watching them, right? But both add value in different ways. And so, it's just to reframe that, all the work can be valuable, but you can be, it's not like having children and you're prouder of one than the other. You get in trouble there, I understand. But, here you can't be prouder of other work you've done. If you're publishing something that was a 60-page manuscript and it took you 2 years to develop and it's in a top-tier journal, you're going to be proud of that in the end, because to get there, that was a big deal. But that's not saying something you publish that's 10 pages long. It's just a kernel of an idea and could have been better developed perhaps or more fully. That's still a good thing too. And I think as a graduate student, coming out and you want to have, you're probably thinking, I'd like to have a publication on my CV going for jobs.
Or several.
What's that?
Or several.
Or several, and not to put, but or at least 1, 2, something like that, or get things out. I think it really is trying to be strategic about, I'm probably not going to get something that would take me 2 years and be 60 pages long and be in a major journal. It's the same thing when you're going for tenure. You can't spend 2 years on one journal article as the only thing you're doing. You got to get some other things out there. So it's sort of this strategic thing of thinking yourself as, I don't want to give all the language. Cultural Foundations folks, I'm a historian of education, so I'm also in Cultural Foundations, but I don't want to get too critiqued. But you don't want to see yourself as a production factory where you're thinking about how you're doing this all strategic. You can make it organic. But there's nothing wrong with starting a couple small things, some bigger things, and that type of thing. So,
I think
a very long
okay,
answer,
sorry.
but yeah.
I just want to add one thing. I think that a lot of graduate students get the advice to present at conferences, right? They're like, oh, you should present on conferences. It looks good on your vita. And I think we spend too much time asking students to present half-baked work at conferences that never becomes something. And the best advice I ever got, and I don't even know who gave it to me, and I don't even know if somebody gave it to me, but was never write a conference paper that you don't intend to publish.
That's right.
Right.
And so for my entire career, I have never done this. I've never written a conference paper and then turned it into a publication. When I present for a conference, I have a publication written at the due date of the conference, something I intend to submit right after the conference. And so I don't write a 8-page paper to present at the conference. I write a 25-page paper that I'm going to submit, and then I pare it down and present 8 pages of it at the conference. Too many people submit too many things for conferences. You're on 3 and 4 sessions, and so you don't develop any of it, right? And so it's kind of like these half-baked projects that could be something good, but you're overextending yourself. And so I think when you propose for a conference, you have given yourself a deadline. The conference is November 1st, and then I have to write this paper by November 1st. Not the conference presentation, the paper, and then you submit it the day then. And like for me, that has been the best strategy in my career, because I publish systematically every year at least one good piece that was written for a conference that I developed. And so I think too many students are doing too many conference presentations, overextending themselves, and then they're never having any time to actually develop them.
It's funny that you said that, because I was thinking something similar. Two suggestions, and talking about smaller venues versus larger. We have the SAPES conference, the South Atlantic Philosophy of Education Conference, and when you present there with the idea of having a full-fledged paper, then you are eligible to submit that paper for publication in their journal. So that is one, direct and not overwhelming possibility. And then one other possibility, depending on what faculty you're involved in, and I was fortunate to be involved in this a couple of years ago, and I can't remember who else was in this group, but we got published in Learning for Democracy, an online journal with Dr. Hudak. He was guest editor, and there were a group of us who expressed interest in working on articles for publication. So that was another great opportunity to get published. And I did have to, we were reviewed blindly, and I did have that experience of reading what the reviewers said, which was a neat experience. And what was really interesting to me about the reviewers was that one was like, yeah, great, as is, and the other was this, and this. So of course Dr. Hudak said, meet them in the middle, address what needs to be addressed, and then go from there. So that's a very fledgling type of experience, but at the same time, if these opportunities present themselves while we're doctoral students, they're really great opportunities. So.
Well, they don't just have to present themselves, you can find them too.
Yeah.
Like in Philosophy of Ed Society, there's published responses to papers. Volunteer, you get asked to do it. You have a publication. Book reviews, you're reading a book anyway for a paper that you're writing or for your dissertation, a 5-page book review. It does look different. I mean, I don't recommend this for new faculty members to do a lot of this or to get caught up in this chapter writing, which is not peer-reviewed or non-peer-reviewed articles. But if you have a book review or response to something in a regional conference presentation versus nothing, you've shown that you know the game of writing and you know places to begin to do it, and you look more competitive when you're looking for a job.
So I know what the top tier journals are in my field, and I know the niche journals that I pull from a lot when I'm doing research. But what is a good, concise place to find out this kind of information about journals in terms of acceptance rate? All the statistics that you hear all the time about journals. What is a good place to look to find a lot of that information, or where to even look to find a lot of that information?
Well, there's a publication called, and I'm trying to think the exact name, it's called Cabell's, Cabells, and I don't remember the rest of the title, Cabell's Guide to Publishing or something like that. And I'm assuming it's still out. I haven't looked at it for a while, but they used to compile information from every journal they could find. In fact, when I was an editor, I used to get a thing from them that I have to fill out a little survey that asks all kinds of things like, things about the publication guidelines, how to prepare the manuscript, what kind of a style they use, the acceptance rate of the journal, the circulation of the journal. So look that up. I'm sure it's still available, and but it covers everything. I mean, all journals, not just education journals. So it's extensive, but I'm assuming it may even be online now.
I actually have tried to find this when I've had faculty when I was chair and for tenure and trying to rate the quality of their journals. It actually is not easy at all. And every list that I found does not include a lot of journals because we have new journals all the time. And I hate to be cynical about this, but this is a game. Every journal editor wants to make their journal look more prestigious than it probably is. There's some that we know are prestigious, and some that, because they have a more historic reputation, but there's all kinds of newer journals. And so, I don't think you can go to one place and easily rank things, just like in life, right? Like there's no ranking system that we go, okay, I shouldn't publish in that one. It's a much more postmodern world, and that's a positivistic orientation, right? Let's put them all in one place, list them, and categorize them. If that existed, our life would be a lot easier in a way, but it doesn't. And even the sites that have them, I spent a lot of time looking for two faculty members that were going for tenure when I was chair. And University of Illinois had a site in education that ranked journals. I mean, different institutions rank them. I mean, they're ranked differently at different institutions. Even the acceptance rate, that some people list on their Vitas is different than other people list. And it could be dependent on a year. Like if you ask somebody this year, the acceptance rate could have been 17%. Last year it could have been 24%. right? Obviously, you want to put 17. You're not lying, right? You know, and so there's all kinds of that happening. So I think after you get invested in reading a lot, you can actually tell the quality differences in things. You know, when stuff gets published and you're like, this does not seem very good, then you like have to ask questions about the journal. And online makes it a lot harder now too, because there's so many online journals, some which are quite good and others that are very questionable.
Well, and I seem to get a lot of emails and Google hits when I try and find information that I don't know if there's a term like this, but they're ones where you pay.
Yeah, they're called vanity presses.
Right. And so trying to weed through that information, those kinds of things versus legitimate sources.
If you ever have to pay,
It's not legitimate.
it's not legitimate.
But don't get that confused with I forgot what the term is now, but you can, maybe you know what this is, where you can actually pay to submit in a legitimate journal, but if you pay a certain fee, then you can have that open the access, so you can actually put a link on your Vita, and then people can click it and link directly to it. Have you seen that yet?
But you don't do it. You do academia.edu and violate.
Well, yeah, I've never done it, but I mean, I wouldn't want someone to say, "Oh, they're wanting money, so I can have this access," and then automatically assume, "Well, it's not a good journal," because a lot of journals are.
I think those are more science-oriented journals to create some sort of open access. But are people familiar with academia.edu?
Yes.
Yeah, people put up their own academic profile with links to all their published articles on it. You get a PDF when it's published, and all kinds of scholars do this now. And in fact, Google is connected to it. So if you were to search one of our names on Google, probably one of the first things that would come up if we had it was an academia.edu page, which you can link to every article that I have published. Mine are on there, and it's great if you put them up there because a lot more people start citing you if your articles are easily accessible. So it's part of a game too, but
Also,
side of me.
yeah, you can also look at editorial boards. That's one of the things I do. I mean, there are people who are well respected in the field, and if they are members of the editorial board, then chances are that's an indication of quality. Not always, but I think that's a good thing to look at.
And asking around about the quality of a journal, like if none of your faculty have heard about it, it's probably an indication of something.
I have a question. I submitted some things, and I'm still waiting to hear back from some of them, and I was rejected by one. But one of the things was a cover letter, like when you go in to submit your manuscript. I mean, it was not on like submission guidelines or anything. When you go in to submit it, it's like upload your cover letter, and that's where you like introduce yourself, say what your paper's about. I mean, there's different things. That was like a new thing to me. I had no idea what to do. Do they actually read those? I mean, because you have like the blind review, because most of the ones are like blind reviewed, but then there's like upload this cover letter. I don't know. I guess
It's anachronistic, I think.
I never read them when I was an editor
Okay.
because I just didn't have the time, and there was they didn't add any values.
Okay, that's kind of what I was thinking, but
I don't know. Maybe some journal editors do.
It used to be that you would submit by mail, right? And it would seem odd just to have an article like about something.
Okay.
So you would say, my name is this kind of stuff. But now that you put everything in electronically, name everything, it's kind of old-fashioned to ask for a cover letter. Now, the thing that you do want to pay attention to is when you get a revise and resubmit, the letter you send with
absolutely.
the revise and
It's huge.
resubmit, which is completely different. Which you do always want to send a letter and say, this is what the reviewer said, and here's exactly the places that I made those changes, and make it easy for the editor to see that you listened and pointed out exactly where you did the things they asked.
Yeah, when I get that letter, I usually quote the reviewers, and I make a 2-column table. I put here's what they said, and here's my response. And lots of times, and Alice and I've worked on this a couple of times, or we're working on one. Sometimes reviewers make comments that just don't make sense, or you don't agree with. And if you can justify those, start off with this is a very nice comment, or this is very insightful, or something like that, and then say, on the other hand, here's why I did it this way. It doesn't mean you have to do everything they say, but it is easy. Make it easy for the editor to say, yes, this comment he addressed it, this comment he addressed it, and then because the editors, if this article is published, then the reviewer, the person that reviewed it and made a bad review, is going to see that it was published, and so the editor's going to end up maybe justifying that to the person, and he can always say it, or she can always say, well, here's the explanation that this author gave. So yeah, make it easy for the editor.
Yeah, and that's, quoting directly from what the review said, that's crucial. And I think also the tone is crucial. You can't say this was an idiotic comment. You just, and that's really, you are subservient to a higher power that you don't know where they are right now, because they're basically standing between you and publication. Because in a lot of cases, your revised manuscript will go back with those reviewed, with your letter of all the changes you made to those same reviewers. Mm-hmm. So you're actually having a conversation with them, and that's why you need to be respectful and say, and especially if you're going to disagree, or say something like, yes, that's a good point, however, we have decided that we're not going to make that change for whatever reason, and that type of thing. And that's where it is. That's where when I started off with the revise and resubmit, you actually are now having an academic conversation. That's the way to frame it. And I will say just about this reject thing, reject, if they give you a rationale for why they rejected it, you can use that for when you publish it somewhere else. I got a reject, and it said you don't have you don't have any conceptual framework. This doesn't make any sense. Well, I was like, oh yeah, I don't. And so I put a conceptual framework in when I put it in another journal, and it moved from revise and resubmit to accept. So that reject was a step towards revise and resubmit and accept, right? So that's where you have to kind of positively construct what would be a negative situation as I'm just learning, and that's where it goes back to a game. Now I'll use the sports metaphor. You get a loss, you're going to learn from what you did wrong in the loss, and you're going to build on that so you can get a victory next time.
But you don't want to use submitting to journals as your editor, right? 'Cause
That's right.
What Rick said, you don't want to piss them
Yeah.
off. If it's sloppy, you don't send it with the hopes that they're going to help you fix it.
And the editors will know your name, right?
Yeah.
And so you don't want to send something really bad to a journal and then 2 years later try and send this, oh, I remember this guy.
Yeah.
Because then they won't even, a lot of journals reserve the right not to send it out if they don't fit to reviewers, if they don't feel like it fits, especially the top level journals, because they're getting so many submissions, they'll just say, that's not even going out. So again, politeness counts, I guess.
Yeah, the other thing I'd say is if you submit something for publication and it gets rejected by the journal, it's not dead. It's dead for that journal. But that's one journal, and there are many, many journals out there. So if they've given you reasons why they rejected it, like Dr. Peck, like Craig said, make those changes and send it elsewhere, and if they reject it, take their feedback, make the changes again. Keep sending it out. I think there's only been one thing that I ever worked on that I thought had publication possibilities that ultimately wasn't published, where I finally just said, this just must really suck. I'm just gonna, and then just let it rest, But other than that, you keep making the changes, and hopefully with each time you send it out, it gets a little stronger, and eventually it will hopefully find a home. So don't get demoralized and quit. Just keep at it.
So at what point do you feel like you do just let it die? Where is that mark?
Well, I think it's like Craig was saying. Part of it is when you just have other ideas, other things you want to work on. Part of it is maybe just, it could be you're just sick of working on it. You're just sick of rereading your own manuscript, and working on it. But it usually doesn't. That usually doesn't happen. Usually you.
And I think you'll also be working on other things, and that'll kind of become part of the past. And you don't want to hear about it anymore, and you just be, that's it, I don't care. So, move on.
Another thing I'd say was just a little different than what we've talked about is, if your manuscript that you submit is in the ballpark, it's the simple things, the common sense things that can make it or break it. For example, other than some of the things I've mentioned already, how you structure and organize the manuscript makes a lot of difference. I've seen many, many manuscripts where there was good substance, good content, but it was impossible to pull out because it was written in such an unorganized fashion. So, think about what order do these pieces make sense? I mean, we have kind of a standard order for most empirical pieces of work, that have to do with, your introduction and problem statement, your review of the literature, kind of like the same way as your dissertation. But within those sections, for example, within the review of the literature section, think about, how do I organize this? What are my subheadings? How do I have subheadings?
Yes.
What are they?
Subheadings are your friends. If you
yeah.
don't have
Very
any-
important to
Yeah.
your friend.
What order does this make sense in? It's got to flow. It should make some kind of sense, the order in which you present it. Same thing with your discussion of your findings, your results. It's not, it's not like throw them up on the air and just pick up one and decide to write about that one. What's the order that makes sense about telling the story? You're an author. Do you think that best-selling novelists just kind of write at random? Not most of them. I mean, they think very carefully about how to tell the story. Well, everything you write, even though it's a piece of research, is a story. And so you have to think about, how do I want to tell this story? How does it make sense for the reader? The other reason it's good to have someone else read it too is not just for editing and substance, but because we get so close to what we work on a lot of times that we assume things in our brain that we didn't put, in words in our manuscript. And so that's where someone that isn't familiar with your work can read it and say, I don't get this. How'd you get from here to there? And you say, well, it's because of blah, blah, blah. Well, you didn't write the blah, 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 So that's why it's good to get a fresh set of eyes on things, too.
Yeah, I always tell students that the level of analysis that you should look at your own writing is a paragraph level. You should know what the function of every single paragraph is. Sentence level is too small, section level is too big, right? There's simple things, like you shouldn't go more than 5 pages or so without a section heading. It's just too long, whatever you're talking about. A book is fine, it's a story different, but you're rambling, right? You should have, the beginning of every section should have a roadmap. Not as pedantic as, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to have 3 main points. These are going to be my sections, but something like that, right? So at any given point in the manuscript, your reader can pick up a paragraph and say, this is the function. This is making this point in this section that serves this larger thing. And so a lot of the writing that, when I give students help on writing, I tell them to reverse outline, right? So somebody has given me 20 pages, and I say, go through every single paragraph, and at the side of the paragraph, tell me the point of it, right? And so what you often find is, like, they'll have a paragraph that's about one topic, and then another topic, and then they're going to have a paragraph that's about this topic again, and then another paragraph about that topic 4 pages later. And it becomes really easy to restructure your writing if you can reverse outline. Every paragraph, you should know why you're writing it, right? What point are you making in that paragraph, and what point does it serve in that section, and what point does that section serve in that larger section? It should never just be, when you find yourself rambling is when you're like, where am I going with this? If you don't know where you're going, your reader doesn't know where you're going.
A couple more rules of thumb that I always had and still have with my doctoral students is, occasionally you'll find someone that writes in one paragraph. In other words, they go pages and pages and pages and never start a new paragraph. So obviously, if you look at your page and it's all the same paragraph, probably you need to chop it up a little bit, think about it, and doing what Kathy said. The other rule of thumb I have, if it's more than 3 lines long, it's more than 1 sentence. Because I think, my particular...
It's a good rule.
Yeah, my particular perspective is just because it's academic writing doesn't mean it needs to be difficult convoluted, difficult to comprehend. So if you find yourself getting into a 4th line and you're still in the same sentence, look at it and say, okay, can I say that in 2 sentences? It just gets too hard to follow all the phrases and everything when it gets that long. Just, do your reader a favor, make it easy to understand.
You should also never have 1-sentence paragraphs. You're not writing a story. 2 sentences, too short. Remember, your paragraph is doing something. So you can't, 2 or 3 sentences is usually not enough to do whatever it's doing. A page is too much. You're trying to do too much in a paragraph.